In this short video, we're going to take a look at the Transform tab. If you're familiar with previous versions, you'll know these as the xform commands. Translate, rotate, mirror, scale, that kind of thing. Before we get into that though, we need to have some geometry to manipulate. Let's go to the wireframe tab and just draw a rectangle. Starting at the origin, drag out into the first quadrant, and let's just give it a 1x1 dimension. And hit the check. Now keep in mind, you can use these transform commands on any type of entity, whether it be a surface, a solid, or a wireframe. So let's start with translate. Go to translate, drag a box around your entity, and hit enter. Now this box pops up, and it gives us a lot of options. The first thing is the arrow, and that allows you to actually add or remove geometry, so you can go back and change your selection. Right over here you have if you want to move, copy, or join. Below that you have the number of entities you want to make. And here's your delta, so your change in X, change in Y, change in Z. You can grab a from to point, change it in polar, and you can flip the direction. So what we're going to do is just click on delta X and try scrolling your middle mouse wheel button. And you can see it moves. Now try that with the Y as well. So what you're looking at here is now the original in red and the copy in purple. And that's what we call the group in red and the result in purple. Now we can copy or move it. In this situation we're going to move it. And let's actually move it to 1 by 1. We're not going to change it in the Z at all. We're going to leave it on the flat top plane. Now let's hit the check. So now I have a purple entity here, and that is masking on it that lets me know that that has been modified, and that's the result of a modification. So to grab that, I can go over here to my quick masks and hit quick mask result. Now that is automatically selected. So now I can move on to the next thing. Let's go ahead and rotate this. You can rotate about any axis, but for right now we're going to rotate about the Z on the top plane. Now again, pretty similar options over here. You have your arrow, you can add or remove geometry. You can move, copy, or join your result. You can make copies, so we could do a circular array here if we wanted. And then you have your center point, which we're just going to leave at the origin. And then you have your angle and also your direction. So again, click here and just try your middle mouse button wheel and you can see it moving. And we'll just scroll it along here. And I'm just going to type in 90. So there we go. We have a result and the original. So we want to copy this one. Let's hit the check. And now we have a purple and a red entity. And I can select both of those by dragging a window around it. Or I can quick mask result and quick mask group and have them both selected. So now let's move on to our next command. Let's go to mirror. So again, another similar box. You have your arrow, your move, copy, join options. And on this one, you can choose the axis you want to rotate about, and that could be an angular or a line. So if I just click here, that's going to rotate it about the x-axis, and I can offset it in the y by some value. So you see I can change that there. We'll put that back to 0. Now if I do the x, same thing. I can offset the direction of where this mirror line takes place. So we want to just go ahead and offset this about the x-axis with no y offset. And we're going to copy it as well. So let's hit the check. So now let's say this is what I wanted and I don't want these colors anymore, this masking. All I need to do is right click and go here to clear colors. And now they're back to green. Now once you do that, you can't go back to being in purple and red. That's a one-time deal. So if you're going to keep utilizing that, make sure you use that before you clear the colors. Last thing I want to show you guys here is scale. So we'll just drag a window around this and click scale. And again, grab here with your cursor and just roll the middle mouse button and you can scale these to any size you want. Let's go ahead and scale these to 1.5. and we'll leave that as a copy. Now you can move that. You can also change your base point of scale. So if I click somewhere else, you can see it scales around a different base point. But we'll leave that at the origin. And there we go, we're done. We'll hit the check. So now we have our series of squares on the screen, and I'm going to clear the colors. So there we go, that's your basic introduction to the xform or transform tools in Mastercam. So now there's one more command that I'd like to show you guys, and that is the offset chains. But before we get to that, we need to know what a chain is. So the simplest definition of a chain is a series of lines, arcs, or curves that are connected end to end, point to point. Now looking at the screen here, I actually have 8 individual chains, and they're all closed chains. And Mastercam's got a pretty cool feature. You can hold down Shift to select an entire chain with one click. So let's try that in this rectangle here. I'm going to hold down Shift and click, and the entire chain becomes selected. Now this is what's called a closed chain, and it's closed because it's an enclosed loop. Now if I delete an entity here, let's just try to delete that one, I'm left with this C shape, and that is an open chain, but I can still select with one click. So hold down Shift and click, and there we go. So that is an open chain. Now there's one more situation, and that's where a chain comes to a branch point. So to show you that, I'm going to go to the wireframe tab and just draw another line on here. So now this chain that we had before has a branch point here. It can go either up or it can go down. So if I hold down Shift and try to select this, it'll only go up to the branch point. It's not going to continue down both of the branches. Now if I try to grab one of the other branches with a Shift click, it's only going to grab that particular branch of the chain. Now another thing is, as you may have noticed, is that chains can overlap each other. So here's an individual chain, and then there's also an individual chain, and they overlap. Now that we know what a chain is, let's try out that offset command. Let's go over to the Transform tab and hit Offset Chains. So here's our chaining dialog box. And if you use previous versions of Mastercam, this has really not changed very much. And you have a few options of chaining here. We're going to only talk about chains and partial chains. So the first thing, let's try a chain. If I click on this rectangle here, I end up with one green arrow. That tells me that I have a closed chain. Now I'm going to in the selection. Now if we try to chain this over here, you notice I get a green and a red arrow. That tells me that I have a start of a chain and an end of a chain. So that would be an open chain. So now let's try the partial chain function. We'll unselect that and try that same chain with the partial. And now what it says is select the first entity. And now it says select the last entity. So I can grab the top or the bottom branch here. Now this allows you to get past branches. So if you need to get around branches or through complex geometry, a partial chain can usually help you do that. So let's stick with this chain really quick and hit the check. And I get my offset. Now I can flip the direction of this offset. I can make it go both ways. And again, I can click this and scroll to change the size of the offset. Another handy little feature that you'll be using when you draw some parts in this software. Alright, so we're done. Let's hit the check. And now that you know what a chain is and how to use these transform tools, we're ready to draw a part in the next video.